Well, welcome, Bev Berekian. We are really looking forward to talking with you today. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about who you are and how you came to be involved with middle school and space?
Sure. So I am probably on my third career. I was in the military for a little bit and then drove a UPS truck and somehow found my way back to college through taking care of seals and sea lions. So very, very weird trajectory to get me into college. And while in college, I fell in love with geology, thought I was going to be a marine biologist, but um, geology had different plans for me. Um, got my bachelor's in geology, worked for a bit in the field, decided I wanted another degree. I wanted to move forward and get a master's degree. I got that one from Cal State Fullerton. But when I was looking for an advisor, my advisor happened to be the department chair. So she said, "You should really come and work here because it would be so much easier for us." And I said, "Okay." So I worked as the geology tech, which opened up a lot of doors for me because then I was exposed to um, professors and teachers. And there was a professor who was teaching a master's in science education program. And I would set up his labs for him. And so we had lots of conversations about becoming a teacher. And I had wanted to do that when I was 17, and I took all these other weird avenues to get there. Um, so eventually, through my college courses, I had a professor say, "Hey, when you're all done with your master's, I'll give you a job at Orange Coast College." And I was like, "Fantastic." And then he called me a couple of months later and said, "Hey, we need you now. So would you come and teach without your master's? We can get you in now." I said, "Fantastic." So I started, and then because everybody knew each other, all of the professors knew each other from Cal State Fullerton and knew him, they worked with my work schedule so that I could get there and teach when he needed me to teach. So that got me really kind of into teaching. Then I decided I wanted to teach high school. So I got into the credential program, and oftentimes you can mark certain things by certain people. And so there was a particular mentor that I had, Dr. Victoria Costa, who said, "You should come and do this space thing with me out in Palmdale. I'm teaching a pre-service teacher institute, and you should come and help me." And I said, "Okay, that sounds like fun." So I went and I did that with her for 2 weeks. And I think we did that 2 summers together. Then I did it, I think, one summer by myself. Meantime, I'm getting connected to space people. So I was accepted into a program out at the Aero Center that was called ARES. And I think it was Airborne Research Experiences for Educators. And we put on a workshop. And I think we had like 200 people at our workshop they were all teachers, educators that came from different places. And again, it comes down to like people. So then there was someone in that meeting, Casey Hines, who was an educator in Arizona. So you might be familiar with Casey. And Casey said, "I'd really like to stay in touch with you." And I'm thinking, wow, like I must be all that. Like she said, "I really liked your part." My part of the presentation had to do with LIDAR and looking at changes of the ground surface after earthquakes. So you could use that technology to do like baseline and then do after an earthquake, be able to see what happened. So then we got online together, and then based on your smiles, you know who Casey is. So then I'm like, oh my gosh, okay, so like I definitely like hit the jackpot with this friendship. And we stayed in touch, and I followed her, and she eventually ended up at Space Center in Houston and said, "You really need to come out here and go to this thing we called SEEK." And I passed on it a couple of times, and she said, every year, "You really need to come out here to this thing called SEEK." So I finally went, and that was where I met my tribe. And truly, that is where my space world exploded, because you meet a group of educators and that are just different. It is not like a typical education environment where people are maybe a little afraid to share, or maybe it's a little competitive. and people don't, they're kind of vying for the same positions or the same accolades or whatever it might be in a regular education setting. In this group of people, we are all just incredibly supportive of each other. We celebrate each other, we cry with each other, and, basically help each other do new things. If someone hasn't done something that you've done, you help them do it and you encourage them to do it. So really then through there is where like I've met, Courtney Black from, National ISS Labs and it just explodes. It's really, it's sort of, Shauna, it's like your background. It is just an explosion of star power that you get the amazing privilege of being a part of.
Yeah, right.
Well, let's unpack that. There's so many great places to jump off. Number one, I'm going to start with, we have a lot of parallels because I was an infantry officer a long time ago. What branch were you serving in?
I was in the Air Force.
Fantastic. So what I like is and I think you might agree, the richness of the diverse experiences you had actually contribute and make you, I think, more effective as an educator, because you did not just go from high school to college and then you became a teacher. I think the diversity of the path that you take really adds color to what you do in the classroom. That's number one. But what I really want to talk about is at parts of your life where you had a mentor that made a life change, your whole trajectory changed because of the quality of a mentorship or a relationship with somebody in the field. I wrote down 4 of my own names: my high school chemistry teacher, an oncologist I worked for at a medical school when I was in high school, the first guy in industry that taught me how to do aerospace, an industry guy, and the Florida Space Grant Consortium director. I think about 4 humans that move the needle incredibly. So I want to thank you for sharing your mentors. Of course, we know Casey for, I'm a limitless space. Casey's she runs the limitless space.
Yes, exactly.
Educator. So Casey's great. We podcasted Casey and her boss, Dr. Sunny White. So you're in good company.
Well, I had the pleasure of having dinner with Sunny in Colorado at the symposium. So, I'm hoping to join you as
that would be great.
Educator next year.
Yeah. So I'll just, and I'm going to turn it over to Shauna after this one statement. What I'm hoping to do this summer is our CubeSat team, some of the kids are interested. We're going to try to create a graphic novel to help explain some of these advanced concepts to younger kids by having our kids make a graphic novel. I think that might be one way we can connect. And some of the stuff that Sunny teaches, it's fantastic. So this is great. So many places we can jump in. Go ahead, Shauna.
Well, I'll just add, like, I'm not a science teacher, right? So my role is really, I'm an English teacher and a debate coach. And when I started working with Kevin, he had these kids who were doing these things like building CubeSats. I didn't know what they were, but they were going to go and speak with people about it. So I thought, well, all right, I'll just tie my cart to this ox here, so to speak, and see if I can help the kids prepare to speak. What I learned really quickly was that in an industry such as aerospace, whatever it is that you're passionate about, there's an interest for every kid. And so I think that what makes aerospace at the younger level so fascinating is that kids don't even know these jobs exist, and they don't recognize that maybe I thought I wanted to be a lawyer, but I can do that within this industry. How are you taking all these great connections that you've been able to make, in these organizations, and actually bringing it down to the level of your middle school students?
My first response to you is that what you just said, that sentence about there is a home for everyone in aerospace, I think that's paraphrasing a little bit, but I have even told people at my district that if we are not guiding students into aerospace, we are giving them a disservice, because they need to know about that industry so that kid who is an electrician or a plumber or the lawyer or the accountant, when they are trying to get employment and they can walk into that industry and go, you know what? Yeah, I'm an accountant, but I know about your industry because I learned a little bit about it when I was in school. That is definitely going to give them a leg up. Everything I've ever done, I've had to know about the industry I was going for. when I went for my UPS job, you bet I knew something about UPS when I walked in there. Right.
Right.
I'm listening to you and I'm like, oh my God, I think I've said those exact words, so which is awesome.
Right.
So in terms of like bringing this down to middle school, I tell them that and I explain that to them openly. I'm pretty transparent as an educator. So I don't really do things kind of behind, like, I just try to tell them why we're doing stuff. One of the things, the projects that we're working on right now, I'm working in the embedded teacher program with the Wisconsin Space Grant Consortium. And so my kids have been designing experiments for microgravity. And so we've had to take some concepts because Dr. Kevin Crosby, his focus is mostly fluid dynamics. Well, that's a pretty high level concept, unless you bring it down to terms like sloshing and about adhesion and cohesion that are definitely topics that we cover at our level. Sloshing is actually a technical term, and my kids have been designing something called a slosh baffle that, it baffles the sloshing. It keeps it from the fluids from moving around. And so that's one way that we've been able to bring that down to them. The other thing that I've done with my students, I'm also a SOFIA ambassador. So I was one of the last folks that got to fly on SOFIA. And so the lessons that we used for looking at infrared light and explaining to kids, just how do we make those pictures that are behind you? How do we see the invisible? And bringing that down to, what, we can do that by looking at LED lights and using different color paper and putting a kid in a trash bag and teaching them about what is air pressure. As long as you show them and you engage them in the activities, I think it's not too much of a stretch to bring these things down to them.
No.
And one of the things that I tell them when I give them things that maybe I know they're not going to understand every single word is that if I were to pick up a geology paper today, I'm not going to understand every word of that paper. I'm just not, because I'm not doing geology every day, especially geology at the peer reviewed level, right? But I'm going to take that paper and I just want to have the ability to be able to pick some things out. And what do I understand? And so giving them like that freedom of knowing you don't have to understand it all, but let's see what you do.
Right. No, I got to jump in. I'm so happy to hear that. I think most of science educators are too quick to, I think we should be cautious about dumbing things down to the kids. We should always teach at the high level because the way you present it can elevate their understanding, right? We should always, I always tell my kids, I'm not going to tell you what an engineer does. We're going to go find an engineer. We're going to work with them on a real world project because the higher fidelity stuff, we can do that. I think actually that's probably the art of teaching is taking the highest, real world stuff and making it understandable. I always think about my best teachers. They could do that. They could take the very complex. I really like a lot of the themes of what you're saying. I really do. I actually, you are saying the stuff that we say. So that's,
yeah, there are a lot of overlaps. I was thinking as you were speaking, I was like, oh yeah, Kevin's going to want to jump in like right now, of course, and where he's at. I mean, you probably saw it looked like a high five. I'm assuming that the student who's there with you, who is what, just barely in ninth grade, is able to resolve some of the issues.
Matt Voss is so they're not normally here on the weekend working, but when you have to hand over, a satellite, work has to be done. So Matt's just, in general, he's a happy guy, and he runs Near Space Education. And for our listeners, he is one of our previous podcasts. So I'm sitting here in next to the clean room, one of the clean rooms, and I have an 8th grade student who's manufacturing some components so we can modify a spacecraft hardware today. So,
that was created by a high school student, but it didn't work, right? And so I think that's like always the lesson is like Kevin will say space is hard, but like the littler people, right? They don't realize that they can't do those things.
Well, and we need to build in grit because the space environment is so tough. I mean, if you think about it, when you said something very cool about aerospace should be introduced to everyone, no matter what they do. right? Because when you do aerospace, you're always dealing with optimization, right? You got limited space, limited volume, limited power, limited data budget. You have to solve problems with all these constraints. That's the real world. That's real world engineering. And so what I really liked when you said that, no matter what field a child ends up in, right? The concepts that they learn about collaborating on a team, solving hard problems, that all is going to pay off for them.
Absolutely.
I have a question about your administration. So we recognize, like, in order to be able to do things that are outside the box, oftentimes it really comes down to having parents who are super supportive, and administration. So what are your biggest challenges with being able to bring these real world opportunities to your students?
I think like I'm in a situation where I don't get a lot of pushback. So I can't say that somebody is telling me that I can't do it. I see the problem is that we aren't celebrating the work that the students are actually doing because it looks a little different. It looks messy. People don't understand it. They don't understand why I have these do-it-yourself snow globes in my classroom. They don't understand why I have, little stars printed. Or why do I have all these pieces of plastic that I'm trying to cut? Why am I trying to find somebody who can help me cut acrylic? Like what are the kids doing? Why do I have simulated Martian and lunar soil? Like what is Miss B doing in there? We don't know. We don't really know, but we're just going to let her do it. And where like I would like to see the next level is that the kids are getting the celebration from more than me. So when, we talked earlier about the DoD STEM to classroom, bringing the guardians into our classrooms. And then this year, getting that amazing letter from the vice president. And so I gave each of my students a copy of that letter. And they got a color copy, and I told them to put it away because right now it might not seem like a big deal, but it is. And I know that many of them, not all of them, but many of them, when I showed them that letter, all of a sudden they were like, oh, that was a big deal. I'm like, yeah, I told you it was a big deal. Like I told you that there were very few classrooms that got this, and you were special enough to get it. So sometimes I think that they need to hear and they need that celebration from other than their teacher. And so for me, like, that's what I would like to see from administration is just a little bit more of that. Oh my God, I can't believe you guys are designing this stuff. I didn't even know what a slosh baffle was, and you do.
Right.
Well, I was just going to say, I think that the idea that they're so used to these opportunities because you provide them that they think everybody has them. I mean, I know that's something that Kevin, you run into too, is like, okay, who else is building cube satellites and sending them up? No one in middle school, right? So it's difficult with that to kind of overcome.
Right. I was going to add external validation, right? Third party validation. It's one thing if your mom thinks you do a good job. It's another thing if somebody at NASA thinks you do a good job, right? Exactly. And I think that has an impact on young learners that we may not even recognize, right? We're the old saying about you're going to plant the seeds and water it, and somebody else is going to sit in the shade of that tree. I think the moment you speak about those are very impactful, right, on the lives of our learners.
I'll share this story with you. So during the course of creating these microgravity projects, and I am not the sage on the stage, right? I've never been the sage on the stage. I don't think I know everything. I think that the best learning environments, whether I'm teaching a middle school class or a college class, is that if we all learn something together, right? So my kids were designing these slosh baffles. And I went up to a group, and one of the students in the group was a student who doesn't come to school very often for different reasons, challenging reasons. And they said, we think we should just put a sponge. Let's just put a sponge in there, and that all the water will get absorbed by the sponge. So I said, oh, but when you get water in a sponge, like the water's not available anymore, right? So maybe think about what a sponge is. Maybe, are you thinking about something with holes in it, whatever. So then I go back to our meeting. our microgravity team meeting, and I'm telling this story, and our PI, I'm seeing Dr. Crosby smiling, and he's grinning, and he goes, "You need to go back to that group and tell them that they need to be design engineers because it took them 10 years to figure that out." And he said, there is actually something called a sponge that they put into fuel tanks that it functions like a sponge, right? So it's gathering all the fluids and it's putting it in one place so that it's available. So I go back to my class and I tell them that. And that student was there that day. And then I decided that, you know what, I'm going to ask Dr. Crosby if he'll zoom in. And so the student wasn't there for a few days, and I told her friends, I'm like, you need to tell them they have to come to school, because I'm going to get Dr. Crosby to zoom in and talk with you guys about his thoughts about this project. So he zoomed in and talked with them. She showed up to school having to walk through the rain because it was like one of those rainy days, like bad rainy days. And I was like, there's no way she's going to be here. And she was there. She came to school. Dr. Crosby zooms in, tells them exactly, showed them one. He had one in his office. And he's like, yeah, it took people 10 years to design this, and you guys thought about it in like 10 minutes. And that student has been coming to school regularly since that moment. And I can honestly tell you that even the way they walk up to me when I'm standing outside my room, we smile, our smiles connect. Like, even if they're not there every day that they show up, it's a different experience than it was prior to that zoom in from Dr. Crosby and him telling them that how impressed he was.
It made the difference. I have to know what the swash, I'm not even saying it right, the slosh woggler or whatever it is.
The slosh baffle? Okay,
Yes,
so
I'm
so you
baffled.
can so imagine like fluids in microgravity or fluids in space. And so think about like propellant in a tank, right? The last thing you want is that propellant moving around. So it's usually not so bad when the tank is full. When the tank is full, there's not a lot of room, right? So, but when the tank starts to get empty, that fluid sloshing around, I always think about like sloshing in a bathtub, but it's the same thing. So that fluid sloshing around can throw off center of gravity. It can make propellants not available when they need to be available. So it's really important to have something in there that keeps that sloshing at a minimum, so that when you need that fuel, that it's there. Or that, like, if you're on the ISS, for example, like there's lots of fluids on the ISS, you know, I mean, even because they recycle urine up there, which I love talking about to the kids, because the kids get all grossed out. They're like, no way. I'm like, way. So, you know, what are you going to do? That's what space travel is all about. So like, even they have to control what happens with the fluids on the ISS as well. So that's what it does. I don't have one here. Otherwise I'd show you one.
No, I just took, believe it or not, a rocket propulsion class for a master's degree. And it was, I'm going to tell you, it was tough. But I know that sometimes we pressurize a tank with gas. And like you said, you got to keep the fuel near where that fuel pump is, or the efficiency of your engine. The engine can shut down. And I think about the sponge idea. I also think about a push pop, you know, where you have some sort of bladder that continuously makes the tank seem full. But, you know, kids are creative. They think about things like popsicle sticks or ice cream. And I like what you said about you let the kids drive the train. And perhaps you've done this. When a kid asks a great question, I like being able to say, I don't know, but if you'll do the homework on it, I'll give you a few minutes in class and you can teach the class. And I often do that with science fair projects, because I try to give them a nice, rigorous project. I actually help them decide it. They have to tell me what they like and we find an idea. But in the end, I want them to teach me about it, because, you know, when a kid teaches other kids, that's about as good as it gets, right? When your kids are the mentors or the advisors. Also, one last thing, you had talked about how things are hard, and I just, you know, our motto for our team is fail fast, fail often, learn from your mistakes, right? So it's like, let's make some new mistakes today. When you said school is messy, or your environment is messy, that's really doing a number of real world things, right? You got to be able to pick up the pieces because invariably anything we do is going, everything we do is tough, right? The
Or
good
create
stuff.
something new from the materials that you have. Like, I think that's super creative. I want to pivot if we can, just for the sake of time, to talk to
Sure.
maybe some of the teachers who are listening too, right? So like students really are inspired by teachers like you who are able to bring the real world to the classroom and then vice versa, take them outside of the classroom for that. And I know you're a member of many organizations. Which of those organizations, if you had to recommend, and it can be more than one, would you recommend for like a teacher who might be listening going, I don't know where to begin. I don't really know a lot about space, but like I recognize I need to be involved in order to maybe have my own mentors.
The first thing that really comes to mind would be attending the SEAT conference in Houston and through Space Center Houston. I'm a crew member, a teacher crew member there, but I feel like that particular conference is sort of centralized geographically. And you get a wide array of people there, and everybody is just really welcoming. So you can show up by yourself, but I guarantee you're not leaving by yourself. So that's one place I would say to start. I think I'm also a solar system ambassador, a NASA solar system ambassador through JPL. And if you already have a little bit of knowledge and a little bit of desire to go out and talk about things and just get because the more you talk about it, the better you get, right? The more you learn. So like if that's something that someone likes to do, you can apply for that online, and then people contact you. Like last weekend, I did a talk in Long Beach at a maritime symposium of all things, and they wanted to hear about space and space travel. And so I got to go talk with them about that. So that's one place that you might get doors opened up. The ISS National Lab, they give us so much, and there's so many opportunities that they open up for us as well. And aside from all of the different organizations, I always say that it's the power of saying yes. And that, we talked earlier about having a couple of like I can go back and I can name for you the people who have changed my trajectory that we talked about. And it's being willing to say yes to things that you don't know a lot about. People told me a year and a half ago I needed to go to air camp and I haven't been to space camp yet, of all things. I've been to space camp. But someone said, you got to go to air camp. And I'm like, okay. So I went to air camp and I applied, and I made some amazing new friends that are also teacher liaisons, and so you just keep saying yes to things. And then at some point you end up where I'm at, and you're like, look, I don't know how I got here, but I'm pretty grateful to be here. And I just attribute it to saying yes and being willing to learn, and not feeling like, again, the sage on the stage, but realizing that I am better. I am a better person. I'm a better educator when I collaborate with people. I'm going to be a better person after having had this opportunity to speak with the both of you, right? So every time I have those interactions, I know it helps me grow and be better. So I think it's just really like grabbing onto that idea, and then you just talk to everybody you can.
I think,
Right.
normally we
Well,
end with like the advice or whatever, but I think that was the perfect advice.
no,
Right?
I do
Yeah.
agree. In fact, there's a whole list of topics we did not get to today that I want to talk to you about. So I think we're going to have you back for maybe a second, a part two, if you will. There's about 4 things I've written down. We just didn't have time for. But if
I
it's
would
all
love
right,
that.
I think that would be great. I think we can schedule that in the near term.
Okay.
Have you back for part 2.
I would love to come back and be a part 2.
Well, we're going to talk with you offline here for a second. We really appreciate you spending this time with us today. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having me.